As we all know, men who have sex with men, so gay, bisexual, and other men who have sex with men, are at very much a heightened risk for acquiring HIV. When we talk about some of the reasons that these people are more at risk for acquiring HIV, we often talk about the theory of minority stress. So that means that there are multiple areas of ill health, or comparatively ill health, that all act together to place MSM at a heightened risk for HIV. So for example, people talk about homophobia or internalized homophobia, a history of childhood sexual abuse, alcohol abuse or substance abuse, and also adverse mental health. And more we're realizing that one of these factors, one of these minority stressors, might be intimate partner violence, also known as domestic violence. There's a lot of research over the past 50 years about intimate partner violence or domestic violence among heterosexual couples, but it's only very recently that people in public health have begun to look at partner violence among gay couples or couples with two men. However, most of our information about violence among these groups, it's based on definitions of violence that were derived from examples of women. So, although the literature estimates the prevalence between 15% and 75% for the lifetime history of violence among men, we don't really have a good idea about what's happening in these relationships between men, and whether or not there is violence, and if it's so, what does it look like? So we developed a project called Project LUST, which stands for Let Us Stand Together, and we surveyed over 1,100 MSM, gay and bisexual men, in the Atlanta area at the end of 2011. We had two main questions. The first was, what do MSM conceptualize intimate partner violence to be? And the second was, how does experience of IPV, or partner violence, relate to sexual risk-taking? We started with focus groups with over 80 MSM, and we began with the conflict tactics scale, which is the current gold standard of violence researchers. And for each item, we asked the people in the focus groups, would they think this was violent if it happens to them in a male relationship? Then we also asked for other additional forms of violence that were not covered by the current definition of violence. We used factor analysis to develop a scale of 23 different items across 5 domains: physical and sexual violence, monitoring violence, controlling violence, HIV-related violence, and emotional violence. Well, we found that we then asked our participants for each of these areas of violence, for each of these items, had they experienced it from a male partner in the past year. And we limited our recall period to 1 year, because many of the studies that currently have been done are using lifetime recall periods, so asking any time in your life. We found that nearly half the sample, about 48%, indicated they had experienced at least one form of violence from a male partner in the past year, although there was wide variation in the forms of violence. The most commonly reported one was emotional violence at about 29%, followed by physical sexual violence at 25%, or 1 in 4 respondents who indicated they had experienced physical or sexual violence from a male partner in the past year. And so when we did some further analyses, we confirmed the fact that yes, indeed, experiencing these forms of violence was correlated with sexual risk-taking among our sample, which really to me indicates that intimate partner violence is one of these minority stressors. It's another area where MSM are at a heightened risk of experiencing these adverse health outcomes. And it's something that we need to start focusing on as public health researchers and public health interventionists. I think the problem first begins, or the answer hopefully first begins, with a recognition in the community that this exists. The classical image we have of partner violence is of a male perpetrator of violence and a female victim of violence. So I think that men who are experiencing violence from their male partners may have difficulty reconciling the fact that they are experiencing something that we mostly ascribe to heterosexual relationships. I think that screening for IPV during routine HIV testing is a great way to begin to have these conversations with men in our communities about what do you do if you're experiencing violence, and how to access resources, and how to hopefully get out of a violent relationship.